All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. The search continues now more than 2 weeks since Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today Show's host Savannah Guthrie, went missing from her Catalina Foothills home there in Tucson, Arizona. We're getting these images high atop as investigators, media continue to gather outside of this home. New information here on this Sunday. Let's take you out, though, to Caroline Elliott on where we stand in this investigation as more developments since that FBI surveillance video, that doorbell camera video that's so critical, so key to this case came out. Let's listen in here.
The search for Nancy Guthrie is now entering its third week, but as far as we know, investigators still do not have a suspect in this case.
What I believe is, what I know is, we found DNA. And
it was not Nancy Guthrie's DNA.
That was not Nancy Guthrie's DNA. So we'll still work with that, and we're working with our lab on that.
The investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie enters day 15, as detectives hope new DNA evidence could provide some answers.
400 cops out there. They all have hope.
Over the weekend, the Pima County Sheriff's Department conducted multiple searches focusing on homes at the Catalina Foothills, not far from Nancy Guthrie's home. Investigators detained at least 4 people Friday night for questioning, but they were later released.
But at the same token, this is not at a loss, because there may have been information that law enforcement was able to extract from all of the individuals involved as we move forward in the investigational process.
In one search, the FBI seized a gray Range Rover about 2 miles away from Nancy Guthrie's home. Investigators were seen taking photos and collecting evidence before towing the car away.
They're probably going to be testing it for hair and fiber, see if there's any blood spatter inside, any DNA that can be pulled off of it.
The FBI now counting on the public to take another close look at this surveillance video from Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera, searching for a man described as 5'9" or 5'10" with an average build. The Pima County Sheriff's Department tells us several DNA samples have been sent to a private lab in Florida for testing. Meantime, the sheriff also told us we should expect daily police activity here in the Tucson area as investigators continue following up on leads. In Tucson, Arizona, Caroline Elliott, Fox News.
All right, thank you so much for that, Caroline. And we're learning some new information here on this Sunday about a potential glove, a potential link that authorities believe between something they recovered and video from that FBI surveillance, that doorbell camera. And I want to put this up here on Live Now from Fox, from our Fox News digital team. They're about exactly what they're seeing, as they say the gloves found approximately 2 miles from the Guthrie residence in a field near the side of the road were packaged up by Pima County and sent overnight. On the 12th, they arrived at a private lab in Florida on the 13th. The FBI received preliminary results yesterday. On the 14th, are awaiting quality control official confirmation today before putting unknown male profile into the national database unique to the Bureau. This process usually takes about 24 hours from when the Bureau receives that DNA. And then some key bits of information saying investigators collected approximately 16 gloves in various areas near the house. Most of them were searchers' gloves that they are discarded in various areas when they searched the vicinity. The one with the DNA profile recovered is different. It appears to match the gloves of the subject in the surveillance video. The FBI has and will continue to provide assistance on whatever timeline is provided for us. Let's bring in the conversation, friend of the program, former New York police detective Michael Alcazar. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And it appears that they have a glove that is in appearance similar to the one in the surveillance video. Is that your take here?
Yeah, I think that's what they're saying, that the glove they recovered looks like the same glove that the perpetrator was using in the video. Now, is it possible that there's DNA on that glove that they recovered but haven't tested yet that they think matches the DNA they recovered in Nancy Guthrie's home? Possibly, and that would be a big, big lead for this case.
Yeah, that would be a very big leap. And they talked about this. They're sending it to the lab. They have to have preliminary results. Can you walk us through that process? How does that go about, and what are they waiting for in terms of confirmation?
I think the confirmation is just basically making sure that they're following investigative protocol, meaning they have a good chain of custody, right? I mean, everything is for courtroom testimony, everything's for prosecution. So they're just making sure they're crossing their T's and dotting their I's before they upload this collected DNA into CODIS, right? CODIS is a combined DNA system that usually that has local and state DNA profiles that they've gathered through perhaps people that have been arrested. They can also check that with NDIS, which is the national database, which has federal, state, and local, which is a more robust system. Now, if that DNA that they gathered, collected, matches in any of those databases, they're going to have an identity for the potential suspect. So this is definitely a big break if they did get, in fact, good DNA evidence from those gloves.
Yeah, and just in terms of that, let's get into that a little bit more, because you mentioned that they might have the identity if the DNA matches with one of these kind of databases that they have. How does someone get into this database? How would someone be in this, and how wide is it? How wide of a net is it?
Yeah, well, the CODIS is local and state. NDIS, the national database, that's, it's throughout the country. It's federal, local, and state. You get into that system because of previous arrests. So if this individual we're looking for has been previously arrested, there's a good chance that their DNA evidence is stored in any of these databases we just talked about.
And there's a possibility that this DNA does not match if they don't have a rap sheet of any kind, correct?
Yes, that's entirely possible. But because of this day and age of technology and people's curiosity, there's another database that they can use. It's like genetic genealogy. You might have heard of that, where people submit their DNA to find out where their people are from, where their background is. Now, you don't have to be the actual person that submits the DNA. It could be somebody that is a member of their family. Their DNA will still match. And then if they match somebody through that database, then there'll be the investigative process to find out those people are, find out who their relatives are, anybody been arrested. And that's another link to this glove, this potential DNA on this glove.
And I think that potentially was what Brian Koberger also potentially implicated him in that case. It wasn't necessarily his DNA, but someone very, very close to him, potentially like his father's or something, if I remember that correctly. I also want to ask you, because you talked about this DNA, are they also doing this to rule people out about DNA that does not match?
I'm glad you asked that, right? So yeah, when we're gathering evidence, we're always going to do elimination profiles. Anybody that had access, that had legal access, that were part of Nancy's lives, that had access to her house, to her car, to her residences, right? And we do that. That's the big lift right there, because there could be a lot of traffic in her house, around the area where she lived, that we have to eliminate, that we can say that, yes, that was the person that cleaned her house. That's her son, or Nancy. I mean, Nancy, that's Nancy's profile. And they have to do that. It's a big, heavy undertaking. I noticed you mentioned that they collected 16 gloves that apparently searchers, when they were helping, to me, that was like a mess. Why would you discard your glove and introduce it to this potential crime scene? That just adds to the work of eliminating those profiles, while they're comparing the profiles to the house, to the stranger DNA that they recovered in Nancy's residence.
Yeah, that is the perplexing part, that line of the statement from the FBI, courtesy of Michael Ruiz, talking about this, saying most of them were searchers' gloves that they discarded in various areas when they searched the vicinity. And I can imagine, as you mentioned, they're gathering this evidence for potential legal proceedings down the road. How does that complicate it? Because there are 16 some odd gloves with all these various DNA. How does that complicate it?
Yeah, they're going to have to show that they investigated those gloves, they tested those gloves, and they identified who it belongs to, and they rule them out as a suspect, that they might have worked for the FBI, maybe they work for Pima County. So it's a big undertaking, and it all has to be documented, right? They have to show chain of custody, because a defense attorney would have a field day with that, right? 16 gloves. How did you identify my client's glove as the suspect? I hope they're doing their due diligence and processing everything, quickly and properly, and again, establishing a good chain of custody.
Yeah, obviously, just seeing all those gloves out there, obviously careless comes to mind in terms of this, but now we're 14 or 15 days into this. We talk about the timeline. They say it's preliminary and then they're waiting for confirmation, the 24-hour window for that. Can you speak to that at all? What timeline are you envisioning potentially having some sort of information, or at least law enforcement knowing?
I think because this is a high profile case, that they can process the DNA fairly quick. I've seen it done as quick as 12 hours, maybe even quicker. So it's going to be top priority for whatever DNA evidence they've gathered.
That's very good. And obviously, we saw over the last couple of weeks 2 different major operations that have really garnered no suspects, no person of interest. We saw that with the Carlos Palazuelos near the Rio Rico. And then on Friday night, they towed a vehicle away from a Culver's, and they potentially questioned other individuals, but did not have anyone arrested or detained. In terms of this, they're kind of sniffing out leads at this point. But when you're seeing so much show of force, what does that say to you?
I think the investigation is more focused because of the video. For me, it tells me that they probably gathered more video footage of potential suspects, maybe people that are not in the normal pattern of like traffic or pedestrian traffic in Nancy's residence. So they've identified those people. They thought they had enough probable cause to question them. I'm sure they did. And a judge signed off on it, because when you're executing a search warrant, a judge has to establish that's enough probable cause. And maybe whatever evidence they gathered was enough to get that PC, and they executed it. But it's more focused. We see a lot happening because since the video recovered, this investigation is now rolling. So it's promising.
Yeah, and how do you balance it as law enforcement? Because you want to have enough show of force to proceed with this search warrant, but you also don't want to spook a potential abductor. How do you balance that?
It's tricky. I mean, if the bad guys are still out there and they're watching this, my fear is they probably left already. They're in the wind. They don't want to wait around to be apprehended. I've talked to a couple of my colleagues, and we kind of feel the same way, that they're not waiting around to be arrested. They're gone. And hopefully they just left Nancy where she's, hidden, and law enforcement can track her down and find her.
Yeah, hopefully, and obviously the family is still holding out hope for this point, but this surveillance video continues to be key to it. Michael, anything else you want to know about this case? Do you feel like we're getting closer to some sort of resolution?
It feels like they're getting closer to a resolution because of the DNA evidence. I am very curious to see what that DNA evidence yields and if it can identify a suspect.
All right, very good. Michael Alcazar, thank you so much for your time, your insight here on Live Now from Fox. Great talking with you here on the Sunday.
You're very welcome.